All right, a very warm welcome to today's webinar, therefore launch of version 30. My name is Jennifer Schmitt and I will be your host for today. It's a great pleasure to be here on the call with you and get to talk about the new features in version 30 of Therefore Online. Many of you already know me. My name is Jennifer, and I am a member of Therefore's digital engagement team here at Therefore. You can reach out to me anytime. My email is jennifer.schmitt@therefore.net, or you can reach out to my team at media@therefore.net. Now, I cannot see or hear you on the call this morning, but I still want to interact with you. So if you do have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. And I'll be very excited to see any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them as well. I see many familiar names here, so it's great that we have so many friends here on the call with me to learn about version 30, which is full of really nice features. So version 30 is part of our standard release cycle. Therefore has two releases every year, one in the spring and one in the summer. The spring release is usually around May, and that's the main release for Therefore. And that means that we have a release for both Therefore Online and Therefore On Premise. And we have a secondary release for Therefore Online in the fall of, well, the fall for us here in the Northern Hemisphere every year, and that is Therefore Online only. So today's release is for Therefore Online only. So all of these new features are only going to be available to the Therefore Online customers. Therefore on-premise customers will get these features starting with Therefore 2024 when we have the main launch next year, and that's going to be end of April, beginning of May, something around there. All right, so again, just to clarify, starting from now on, all these new features that you hear about are only going to affect Therefore Online customers. So, of course, we have many different data centers for our Therefore Online around the world. And we will update the data centers for our Therefore Online customers one by one, starting today, actually, with India. So those of you who are in India, raise your hand, let me know if you're out there, because you guys are the very first ones to have a version 30. That was already updated probably last night for you. I just saw that update go out. So you guys are really excited. You guys get the first ones, but don't worry, Asia, you guys get your updates very soon. October 9th is coming. Then Australia, and then we'll have Europe, and then the Americas, and then finally our data center in Japan. So you guys can check out this website status at thereforeonline.com for any news and features. I am subscribed to it. I get emails all the time telling me about different incidents and different updates, but this is exactly how the schedule should be. But you can always check it out just in case there is some differentiation. To upgrade to version 30 is really easy. I actually did it this morning from my beta system that I was using. First, you'll get a little message like this in the corner of your Therefore client. You click that blue link, then it says a new version is available, Therefore Online version 30. You click install, then the exe file is downloaded. That takes about 2 minutes, and then the update will happen. You press next, and all in all, I timed it. For me personally, it took about 5 minutes. But let me know how long it takes when you update your clients. In any case, it's a very straightforward, easy process, and it immediately gives you access then to the new features. So that brings me to the next slide. What is the agenda? What are these new features in version 30? So these include a completely new web client, the ability to share documents with users within and outside of your organization using a link, new formatted conditions on the fields. These allow you to make certain fields mandatory, visible, or invisible under certain conditions that you define. We also have enhancements to e-forms, which includes a better method for making forms available anonymously. And then we also have referenced web services, which you can see here in the screenshot. This allows you to use the data from a REST service or an app as a reference table within Therefore. I'll explain that more in detail when we come to it, because it does sound very technical, but it is super cool. So I do want you guys to really understand what's going on because it is really, really interesting. And finally, we have some other features. So for example, what you see here in the screenshot is you see a list of your past logins. So we have that new security feature, for example. So without further ado, let's move on to the first new feature, which is the brand new web client. So the first new web feature that I'm talking about is we have completely redesigned and rebuilt the Therefore dynamic web viewer. The web viewer allows you to access your Therefore repository online over a website, over a web browser. You don't need to install the client if you don't want to. You can just type the URL into the web browser of your choice, like Google Chrome, Edge, Firefox, whatever it is that you're using, and then you can access all your documents and workflows in the Therefore system directly on the web. That web client has been completely redesigned to make it more performant, faster and easier to use than ever before. And we've also changed the interface a little bit more just to make it slightly more modern looking. You can see here in this GIF, we still have these dashboards that are really interactive. They can be dragged and dropped and you can easily design them. And then we also have a new workflow and tasks view. So the workflow and tasks are actually shown on the same page here. Many of these icons look slightly different, but overall, it should be really easy to use. If you've used the web client in the past, the new one should be really easy to understand right away. Now, the new web client doesn't have all of the same features that the classic web client had. So users who are still logging onto the classic web client, which was a really, really old one, that one is still available. They're going to be directed to this landing page here. It looks just like this. And they can then either try out the new one or they continue on with the classic that you see down here. And so I do believe that for most users, the new web client is going to be much better user experience. It's much faster, it's more intuitive. It's not as squeezed together. It just aesthetically, it just looks a lot better when you're using it on the web. So for most users, they should try out the new web client, I think. But of course, they can switch back to the old one at any time. We will continue to support both the classic web client until the new web client has feature parity. So until the new web client has all of the same features that the very old one had, we'll continue to support the old one just to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind. However, new features will be introduced to the new web client on a rolling basis outside the scope of the traditional launch schedule. So that means that you can expect this new web client to get better and better within the next few months, because we're spending a lot of development resources in it to make it as performant and as good as possible. The reason for that is that we know that people really like to use the web client. Nowadays, a lot of people are working from home. A lot of people, when they do home office, they have to use their own private computers. They don't get a machine from their office that they can take home with them. And so they don't want to have to install anything on their own devices if they don't have to. And so if you use the web client, you can access all of your Therefore documents, your workflows directly from the web, and you don't need to download anything onto your local machine. So it's a really great resource for those of us working from home. Anyways, I really hope that you guys check it out. It's a wonderful resource. And just to clarify again, Therefore online customers are going to have two web viewers, which is the new one here. It has that nice white interface. And you can switch to the classic web client by highlighting this the top right corner, click your initial, and then select Therefore web access. And then the browser will change over to the classic web client, which is basically just looks like this. It looks like the installed version online. And then the installed version, you can go to File, and then select the Therefore Dynamic Viewer here from this button down below. So you can see it's very easy to switch back and forth between the two. So go ahead, give it a try, and let me know what you think about the new version of the Therefore web client, because I think you're going to love it. And personally, for me, when I use the new one, I notice it's so much faster than the old one. And I just think it's more intuitive and you get faster to what you're looking for. So, I really enjoy it. All right, that brings me now to the next new feature, which is sharing documents. So it's now possible to share a document in Therefore using a link. both with internal and external users. So that means that you can easily share documents with people who would usually not have access to those documents. So have you ever wanted to share a document in Therefore with someone else? Maybe you're in the HR department and you're recruiting a new employee for the QA department. You'd like to give the QA manager an interesting CV to look at, but they don't have access to the CV category because that's only available for HR. So now you can just send them a link in Therefore, allowing them to have access to that document temporarily. So the advantage is that by sending a link, you don't need to clog up your email servers, you don't need to download the document locally, you don't need to create a new version outside of Therefore. You can just send a link to the document within the Therefore system. This allows you to maintain traceability of what has happened, decrease network traffic. And when you're sending a link, you can also select a password and for how long that share link is valid, which gives you a little bit of more control. Users also have full visibility over which links have been shared with them and which links have been shared thanks to a new node in the navigator where they can really easily see exactly what has happened. The best part of this new feature is that it's included as a standard part of Therefore, no additional licenses are needed. And when users share a document using the Anyone link, no additional user licenses are consumed. So people who access the Therefore system from outside, who don't have a Therefore account of their own, they can access those links and view those Therefore documents without consuming a Therefore user license. This means it's a very cost-effective and easy way to share Therefore documents. And of course, once a user opens up the document, they can view and download it locally if they want. Yeah, so this is the feature. You open up a Therefore hit list, right-click on the document, and then you can go to share, which is right here. Then you'll get this box here, and you can select who to share it with, anyone, my organization, or specific people. Specific people would be specific people in the Therefore system. You can then select a password and an expiration date. And then you can also give them, if you're sharing with people in your organization, you can also select which permissions they have. If it's only view, edit, or whatever permissions they would usually have. So it's a very powerful feature, especially since you can easily share it with so many people outside of your organization. Now, one of the concerns that people might have when they hear about sharing documents is they might be concerned that this is going to subvert the security of the Therefore system. Now, of course, the idea of sharing documents is to give people access to documents that they would usually not be able to access. However, we have configured this feature in such a way that it's extremely easy for administrators to control which users and which categories can be shared. So what we see here is we first see that sharing documents in general can be enabled or disabled in the settings of the solution designer. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing this new node sharing options in the settings where you can select, is it available to anyone? Is it available only within your organization for people who have certain permissions, or only exactly without permissions or with permissions within your organization? Or is it available to anyone in the entire world? So that's one thing. Then you can also say how long are public links, do they have a mandatory password, yes or no? And which role is able to share, which role is able to grant edit permissions to other people, or which role is able to grant view permissions. And that also allows you to have a little bit more of control, because of course you can make it so that only administrators, for example, are able to share documents with edit permissions. And that would give you a little bit of more ability to precisely say which users have that ability, because of course you have to trust certain users to use their powers in Therefore in a responsible manner, right? Then the second way that you can control sharing documents is on the category level. This screenshot here that you're seeing here, it's the contracts for e-signature category. And here on the individual category level, you can completely enable or disable sharing. So you could say that there are certain categories in your Therefore system that have very sensitive documents that should never be shared. This might be financial documents or HR documents, for example. You might say that in your business, you can go ahead and share all the marketing content because that's going to be public at some point anyways, right? But here in this category, you can say sharing options are disabled. Again, you can, and then you can also say which roles can edit or view. And then finally, you can then define which roles are able to share documents. And that goes into the role-based access control, which is our security concept. You can either enable or disable sharing. What you see here in the GIF is you see me just clicking and unclicking sharing documents from the contributor role. So you can see there's 3 layers of security that come together to make sure that sharing documents is precisely controllable so that you can have the full advantages of easily sharing documents without completely disregarding the security and integrity of your Therefore system. Yeah. I did receive 2 questions. Let me check really quick. What is the longest expiration date or time for a shared document? I believe up to 6 months. What is the permission for default? So the default actually comes from, that's a really good question. So if I go back here, this is the default is based on what you see here, whatever permissions were set in the solution designer under settings. That will then be inherited down, and you can always change the default. When you first upgrade your system to version 30, one thing that you'll notice is that the default permissions that are going to be applied when you upgrade to version 30 are going to be based on what permissions your system previously had. So before version 30, we already had the export, send permissions and print permissions. Whatever users had export permissions are also going to be given the share documents permission. So in previous versions, export was the ability to open up a document in the navigator and export it, meaning export it out of the Therefore system as a PDF file, for example, and then email it to someone. Because that is already very similar to sharing documents minus the traceability. Our development team said if someone previously had export permissions, they should also have sharing permissions. So if you are a system administrator and you say to yourself, oh, I don't want any users with a reader or a writer role to be able to share documents, make sure that you also remove their export and print document permissions as well, because those will also enable them to move documents out of the Therefore system. That's my recommendation, is really think about what should your users be able to do, and then apply the permission sets in a consistent manner. Good. All right, thank you for those questions. Those were really, really well done. Now we're going to move on to the next feature in our version 30, which is conditional formatting. So conditional properties can be set for index data and during workflow. What does that mean? It means you can have a wide range of conditional formatting and calculations now for many field types. That means that under certain conditions, fields can change color, they can become mandatory or disabled, depending on what conditions you have set. You can also make it so that the conditions are only valid during workflow. So for example, in this GIF, what you see here is when the employee name is Julia Bell, so he's typing in Julia, it turns yellow. That can be just a way of making sure that users have more attention to a certain field. Then we can also see here is he's filling in the start date and end date for a holiday request. When the end date is before the start date, it turns red to let the user know that that's not an invalid entry. What we can also do is we can have certain fields become mandatory under certain conditions, so or we can have them become disabled. And the purpose is to make it more easy for users to fill out the index data correctly. So we can help users add index information or complete workflow tasks. We can easily direct a user's attention to important information, or we can add or remove visibility of index fields or data tabs to improve accuracy. So in sum, this is a really nice help that administrators can do for their users, just to make sure that the users really understand where the information is and what they need to do. I do have another example here. So this is showing the configuration. So what we see here is we see a tab, and I'll wait for the GIF to go back to the top. So when they select health insurance, click, all of a sudden the tab becomes visible and the information here is required to be filled in. So until they filled in that they had health insurance, the tab was not even visible. And so you can see how something like that makes it much easier for users to fill out the required information when they're saving new documents to the system, because it really guides their attention to the fields that should be filled in. And then the formatting for that is actually quite easy. There's a new tab here called Formulas. It says when car allowance was yes, it becomes mandatory. So it's quite a simple feature to configure. It works really well. And I think there's a lot of really good use cases. And you can imagine also doing a workflow, if there's certain fields that need to be filled in at a certain point in the workflow, by having them turn yellow, it can easily guide a user to making the correct decision and doing a good job. So it's really nice. We also have some e-form enhancements as well. So e-forms are my personal favorite, and we have two small enhancements this time around to make e-forms a little bit easier to use. So the first new enhancement is that we have an easier, more secure method for anonymous forms. So anonymous forms basically just mean that people can access an e-form even if they don't have a Therefore user account. It can be accessed anonymously by anyone in the world. Previously, the method for making a form anonymous was quite cumbersome. It required creating a e-form user, but now to make a form anonymous, you can just open up the form in the solution designer, right click, and then select anonymous access. Thereafter, you have to send out the link with that allow anonymous equals 1 suffix at the end. So that is a little bit easier. Then second of all, now under settings, you can automatically save e-forms as a draft. This was requested because sometimes users were filling out an e-form and all of a sudden they lost access to the internet. And when that happened, of course, the form would get lost and they had to re-enter all the data. But now we have an autosave option that can be enabled, and you can then check it and then select the interval, how frequently that form should be autosaved. So that is very convenient. And this is for authenticated users only, so users who have signed into Therefore will then be able to find their saved drafts in their drafts in the e-form designer. And now we have referenced web services. So referenced web services sounds very scary, but it's actually quite simple. We did get a question just now about the autosave drafts can be edited by other users. No, it's not designed for that. If you wanted an autosave draft to be edited by other users, there would have to be a workaround where you save that one version into Therefore, take the index data, and then populate a new form using the HTML parameters for that. So it's a little bit technical. There is a workaround. If you do have questions, then please email presales@therefore.net and we can help you set that up. So there is a workaround available, but it's not a standard feature out of the box. All right, so referenced web services is now possible. So you can now use a REST web service as a reference table in Therefore. I know what you're thinking. What does that mean? Referenced web service as a table? Well, many of you might already know that you can connect Therefore to a third-party database. For example, you could connect Therefore to your supplier database. We call that a referenced table. And you might already know that you can get or send information to an app or service using REST. REST is just a communication protocol. And many, many apps and services nowadays use REST. So therefore can communicate with all kinds of software and services out there, because therefore can understand REST as a communication protocol, right? Well, now we can take the data from a REST web service and use it as a reference table. That means every time that you save a new document into therefore, you can access all of that information from that REST service and populate your therefore document with it. This is really interesting. Now, there are so many use cases for this that you really have to be a little bit creative when thinking about how can you use this new feature. The reason is REST is just so popular and there are so many different services and apps. What we see in the GIF here is I'm saving a new document to therefore, and I'm using a currency conversion service to get the latest currency exchange rates when I'm saving this document. So that's just one very simple example, but you could connect to any service or app that has REST. So for example, if you have an HR software that has a REST interface, you could use it to show how many available vacation days you have when you request time off, right? So you could see that result before you request time off so that you know exactly how many vacation days you have left. My colleague in Germany suggested connecting to their finance database. So in Germany, they have a database of valid tax information numbers. And so that you can do a query to that to check if the information from an invoice that you receive, if it's actually from a valid business, so that you could use that as a check against fraudulent invoices that you might be getting. You can also do it to connect to, for example, Microsoft Dynamics Nav. They also have a REST interface. So the possibilities for this are really endless. You have a lot of possibilities to get better integration, better communication between platforms, and just ease of use. So this is a little bit more technical, but it really is a feature that's important for people like me who are not technical to also understand, because it is so powerful and it can really improve the way that your customers are interacting with their information, saving them a lot of time, increasing the accuracy, and just making the data exchange more smooth and easy. Finally, we have a couple of other features as well. So the first one is that you can now see the username in the workflow history. And it looks like this. If you go to your workflow history, you can see who made the changes to that workflow, at what time. If you see unavailable, it simply means that those changes to the workflow were done prior to version 30. Because prior to version 30, the server didn't keep track of which user was making the changes in workflow, and so it just says unavailable. So when you first upgrade to version 30, you're going to see a lot of unavailable because the server prior to version 30 just didn't keep track of those changes. Next, you'll also notice recent logins. This allows users to check on their own activity on the therefore system. This is also in part because we have better accessibility. Users can now log into their accounts on multiple devices simultaneously. So for example, you can log onto the standard therefore installed client and onto web access at the same time. And so for that reason, it's important to be able to check on your own recent logins. If you do notice that there is some suspicious activity, that there are recent logins that you don't recognize, then you should contact your system administrator and change your password. And finally, we also have added increased support for email providers, including SMTP via OAuth 2, Office 365 as a user or an app, and Gmail. Finally, I would be amiss if I didn't mention that we also have created training content for version 30. So Roman Dukic and I have made some really excellent e-learning content for version 30. I launched it this morning, so you guys can be some of the first people to go through it and learn all about the new features in version 30 again. So this training content does show you how to configure and install these features, but even if you're not very technical, that we do have user experience videos as well that go into the full user experience, what it is like to use these features. I do hope that you check out the e-learning. It is really excellent, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. So that concludes my webinar on version 30. As always, thank you so much for spending the morning or afternoon with me. I really appreciate it. If you do have any more questions, please let me know in the chat. And I do have a question for you now. If you open up, you'll see a pop-up that says new features in version 30, and the poll is asking, what features are you the most excited about? So, we're getting some responses in. Oh, we got a whole bunch. I'll wait a few more seconds. Everyone answer. Ooh, getting some more in. All right. It looks like the responses have stopped. So here I will share the results. So you should be able to see the results now. And as you can see, we had about 33% of the people say they're excited for all the features. And then the other winner thereafter was sharing documents, followed by the new web client and conditional properties. So wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that you guys are excited about the new features. And as always, if you do have any further questions, please contact me, jennifer.schmitt@therefore.net or media@therefore.net. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I know you are busy, and it really means a lot to have you on the call with me today. So since I haven't gotten any other questions in the Q&A, I'm going to stop. And want to just say once again, thank you again. Have a wonderful day or evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.